Hi, I'm João Lima, editor of The Economy, and this is Frontline. I've got here with me today Sheila Fitzpatrick, Chief Privacy Officer at Netapp and a Global Privacy Attorney. Sheila, thanks a lot for talking to me.
Thank you.
We've recently spoke about GDPR and how is it going to change and impact the industry. And then recently there's been a huge hack with Equifax. Can you explain what happened there?
Sure. Well, so what happened was they had unauthorized access into their environment. Obviously, it was defined as a security breach, and it's impacted over 100 million people. I think it was close to 160 million people. And the problem is not only was there unauthorized access into the environment, but it also exposed that there was personal data being collected that should not have been collected or people weren't aware of it. So it went from being not only a security violation, but a privacy violation. And as you know, we all understand that attacks do happen, but when you lose that trust and when you realize that organizations are keeping and collecting data on you that you don't know about is when there becomes a problem. So the Equifax violation is really filtering through through the industry, and people are all looking at what happened.
And then as we talk about GDPR, how would, for example, GDPR impact a company like this? Because the fine would be massive, I guess.
The fine would be absolutely massive because Equifax actually has, a global presence because they are collecting data on individuals from all over the world that would be applying for credit. And so if GDPR had been in effect, the sanction could be as high as 4% of their annual global turnover, which is a pretty substantial amount, absolutely.
What lessons do you think the industry needs to learn from this event?
Well, I think the first one is that, as we're hearing, apparently the violation occurred several months ago, and it's only recently that they actually came out and identified the fact that they had an intrusion into their environment. So I think it's that transparency. The industry needs to learn when something like this happens, you need to get in front of it. You can't hide it. You can't try to cover it up. You need to be transparent with the public, build that trust, rebuild that trust, and get out there and just be open with what happened. It's when you try to hide things is when you have problems, and I think that's the problem that Equifax is going to have moving forward.
What do you think is going to happen to them?
I think there's going to be many lawsuits. We've already seen that attorney generals from certain states, Massachusetts is the most recent that has filed a suit against the company, and I think we're going to see not only states suing and legal entities suing. We're going to see individual lawsuits. We could see class action suits that might occur. There's going to be a massive financial and potentially criminal activity.
And how do you think Europe is going to react?
I think it's once again going to put Europeans on notice and give them concern about sharing their data with US-based companies that they're not sure about how they treat and respect that fundamental right to privacy.
Okay, and then Sheila, you're very, very knowledgeable about GDPR. How's it coming along since we last spoke in June? How's the adoption? Well, there's no adoption yet, but you see the market changing their views?
I'm seeing it slowly changing. I mean, there's a lot of companies that are still burying their heads and basically saying, oh, it's not happening, or there's a lot of churn out in the marketplace where they're saying, well, maybe the data protection authorities will actually relieve some of the obligations. It won't be as stringent as you think. I'm seeing other organizations that aren't really addressing the privacy component, which is the fundamental aspect of GDPR.
So from the moment that you collect the data until you destroy it?
Absolutely, and what your privacy framework looks like, your program, that foundation for which you collect and build data. What organizations are doing is they're automatically looking at tools and technology. So they're trying to buy data lineage tools, data classification tools, data discovery tools, without realizing that what they're doing is they're building a house starting with the second floor. They have to build that privacy foundation and say, what does my privacy program look like? Do I have binding corporate rules in place? Do I use model contractual clauses? Do I have the explicit consent of individuals to collect that data? So a lot of what's happening is more around the technology space, which is going to be important later on, but that's not where companies should be starting the journey.
Do you still think there's a lot of cloud washing going around, a lot of people trying to sell technology and tools?
Absolutely.
To sort GDPR, which is the wrong way to do it.
Yeah, there's a lot of scaremongering. There's a lot of I'd say unrealistic expectations being set in the marketplace. There's a lot of marketing collateral going out talking about, buy my data lineage tool and you'll be compliant with GDPR. Well, GDPR is a lot more than just buying a tool. And don't get me wrong, tools and technology are very important, but they're going to help you maintain ongoing compliance, not obtain compliance.
Would you label it almost as a cultural thing, more of a cultural thing than just just about technology, because privacy is more about culture, being able to understand your customer's data, the citizens' data.
Right.
Could you call it a cultural thing?
Absolutely.
Cultural shift?
Yeah, I think you absolutely can call it a cultural shift, because if you think about Europe and just think about Ireland where we are today, there is that fundamental expectation of privacy, and you have that fundamental right to privacy. If you look at other jurisdictions like the US, privacy isn't looked at in the same way as it is here. There's no mandated legislation in the US that would equal GDPR or even the Irish Data Protection Act. There's more of this feeling of self-regulation in the US where there's no real expectation of privacy. So you're absolutely right. It is a cultural difference, and that cultural difference is changing. If you think about Asia Pacific, one of the fastest growing regions in the world right now with the implementation of privacy laws. So other countries are starting to look at what Europe's doing and are adopting that approach. US is a little bit slow at adopting that.
But it's also very interesting, because you mentioned this morning around the EU countries as well, so the 28, soon to be 27.
Right.
You mentioned they are also they're spending time building their own data regulation bills. And we heard the minister this morning as well talking about the data regulation bill that's going to come out in Ireland.
Right.
How does this work with GDPR? Because we all thought that GDPR was just a cloud that will cover every single country.
Right.
And each country is now coming up with even stricter sort of laws.
So the intent around GDPR was to be a harmonized approach, so that organizations, when they're doing business within Europe, didn't have to manage to 28, soon to be 27 different data protection laws. And so the intent of GDPR was to look at combining the requirements of all of the various jurisdictions and building one platform and one regulation that all countries would comply with. What's happened, though, is two countries, Germany and Austria, have recently released their new Data Protection Act, their national law. And there are components of those laws that actually have additional restrictions than GDPR. So what's happening is organizations are going to have to not only look at GDPR, but they're going to have to look at what are the carve-outs in each of the various jurisdictions. So in Germany, there's stricter requirements around the handling of employee data than you see within the GDPR. So it's almost counterintuitive to why GDPR was put into place to begin with.
So this was going to ask, isn't that a bit counterproductive to the first intention in the first place?
It certainly runs I don't want to say runs afoul is not the right word. It is counterintuitive, and it really is in many ways challenging that attempt to harmonize the laws. Because if one country thinks that they need to have more restrictive obligations, companies are going to be back in the same place. We're going to have to look at, okay, what is GDPR? Does that become the minimal baseline? But now I have to look at Germany, I have to look at Austria, I have to look at what Ireland's doing. I mean, it could end up being complicated again.
Okay, but then come May 25th, 2018, what do you expect to see?
So come May 25th, 2018, I think there's going to be a lot of churn. We're going to see a lot of webinars, a lot of white papers, a lot of companies that are saying, today's the day, what have you done? Come May 26th, I think, is when the reality is going to set in, and companies are going to start to realize we didn't take the right approach, we're missing our policies, we don't have that foundation in place. There's going to be audits. I think you're also going to see an increase in subject access requests, because citizens are going to realize that they have the right to know what data organizations are going to handling on them. I think there's going to be some companies that try to take advantage of it and look at trying to entice individuals to challenge what companies are doing with their data. So I think there's going to be additional companies jumping on the GDPR bandwagon for revenue generating.
How long do you think it's going to take until someone is fined those 4%?
That's a great question, and that's one that I always think about. Everyone's going to be waiting for. I don't know when it's going to happen, but I know that it's just going to take one massive violation, and the data protection authorities will use that organization as sort of their case study of what not to do.
Do you think we can see companies like Google, Microsoft, AWS fall into this? Or?
Well, it's hard to say what companies exactly, but I think it'll certainly be the companies that rely on personal data as their business model. So you think of the social media companies, their whole business model is around the collection and in some cases selling personal data. So there'll certainly be, and it'll be the large organizations that really haven't done what they need to do in order to comply. Maybe they've talked about security but not really talked about privacy, or tried to push a lot, like the hyperscalers in some cases may still try to push a lot of obligations back down to their customers, instead of accepting their accountability as a data processor, they may still try to have their terms and conditions where accountability is pushed back down.
Okay, Sheila, thanks a lot for talking to me.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you. Don't forget you can also follow Data Economy on Twitter, Facebook and LinkedIn, and visit the website on www.data-economy.com.